you have about data mining and predictive analytics. This is the free consulting segment of our webinar. It's open access to the modeling agency's gurus, Scott Terry and Tony Rathburn. And again, Tony will hopefully be back with us in just a few moments, but you're going to be in great hands with Scott Terry. So let's go ahead and jump right into the questions. And we have one coming in from Stefano. Great question here. Based on your work experiences, which programming language is most effective for the implementation of machine learning solutions? I'm going to throw that over to Scott here in a moment. I know we're going to answer this as consultants typically do and say that it's highly situational. I'm sure it depends on your background and experience in coding. One of my questions, just to open this up for Scott, is programming necessary? And, I'm thinking you're looking to code it into a process, some kind of a repeatable process if you're looking to get into the coding, because I think a lot of software out there is very efficient at automating a lot of the steps for the modeling process, at least starting with some of the data preparation aspects. A lot of that you do have to do on your own, and perhaps once you get that roadmap, you can then code some of that. And we can talk about what's popular, I think, for programming languages around analytics. Certainly R is very popular, and there's some that are related or more fitting to big data, Python and the like. But what is best for you is really highly situational. So let me go over to Scott. And Stefano asks, based on our experience, what programming language is most effective for the implementation of machine learning solutions? Scott, I had your audio just a moment ago. And so
hello?
There you go.
Okay, sorry. I had you guys on mute, so I apologize. Yes. Stefano, that's a great question. I have to echo what Eric said. Yes, it really is situational. Every environment is different. I do believe that if you do acquire some programming skills, it is very helpful to what we do, because one of the myths of what we do is that everything is about dumping data into an algorithm, and it has some intelligence and stuff just spits out on the other end that's mystical and magical and gives you instant insights. That couldn't be further from the truth. As a matter of fact, probably 50 to 70% of all that we do in predictive analytics and data mining has to do with actually shaping up the data, exploratory and analytics, and data transformations, outlier detection, all that kind of stuff. And having programming skills can certainly help you in that. If I were to pick, drive a stake in the ground, certainly if you're working with the two big commercial products, SAS and SPSS, you're going to be well equipped for what you have to do. Of the open source, of course, right now, R is kind of the 800-pound gorilla, but in terms of programming capabilities, I believe that Python is really nipping on its heels. As a matter of fact, that's my open source tool of choice. But really, as Eric pointed out, just about every package that you can get is going to have some data prep capabilities. But the bottom line is, if you learn how to program, it's going to increase your chances of being employed and success.
Oh, good point. Looks great on a resume. And at the same time, I know Tony would impress that, as he did in the last part of his presentation, is let's not make sure we don't just code a great rocket and then not have a mission plan. So you certainly want to ensure that you've got all of those operational objectives well defined, and that the business metrics are going to be hit, not just the analytic metrics, because like Tony said, they do not equal. So all that coding won't matter much if you didn't get buy-in from the stakeholders, if they don't, if the results aren't translated in terms that they'll understand and adopt, or if it's to be operationalized, to understand what that environment does and how it works, and what's the data velocity, and how often we're going to have to maintain the model and monitor it after it's built. There's so many strategic aspects that need to be looked at the project level before we even introduce software or code the data and worry about those analytic metrics. And I'll tell you, that is the vast majority of projects end up doing that. They focus on the data, the software, and the analytic accuracy, and then it just falls apart at the project level. And that's really the emphasis of this whole webinar about failure to launch. It's not that people aren't building these great sophisticated rockets that work very well, have all the thrust that you could ever need, but they throw it out into space and then ask, what's next, or why does this matter? And there's no answers to that because nobody did the upfront work for comprehensive assessment and definition. So that's probably the best advice we can give here, is that with all the data scientists out there that can build the great rockets, many don't have either the soft skills or the experience and the business acumen to be able to interview all who contribute to or benefit from the modeling effort and be able to put together that comprehensive project definition that's going to allow the project to succeed at that level, not just the analytic level, but at the project level, and not only come up with measurable results and actionable results. You hear that all the time, but results that are residual. And I even see that we're going to hit the residual part here with 2 questions out. We're going to do a total of 3 here because we're up on the last few minutes. We have about a third of those who started out the event that struggled with its launch. We did succeed in launching at least, but had a few struggles there. We'll work out with Citrix, and thanks again for your patience on the late start as well as the reduced screen here. So let's go on to the next question. This is from Howard. Is there a way to produce a simple predictive modeling prototype just by using Excel, and how much data would be needed? So a 2-part question. I know Scott's going to have great things to say about that. Tony's one who's a huge fan of Excel because everybody has it. A lot of the analytics, quite the majority of it, can be simplified to working with just logistic regression, in some cases linear regression if the data is prepared correctly, as Scott showed in his earlier part of this presentation. And then, the amount of data needed, I'm going to have Scott speak to that, because that's highly situational as well. It really depends on the complexity of the solution space, and there are some tricks you can do if you are working with a lean amount of data for preparing your training, test, and validation sets. So Scott will speak to that. But that's a great question. How can you produce a simple predictive modeling prototype just by using Excel, or is it possible to do that, and how much data would be needed? And, as I go to throw this over to Scott, I'll think of an Einstein quote that you should only use as complex a model as is necessary. So you should always strive to use the most simple model that's going to fit the bill. And I'll tell you, unless there's considerations around accuracy versus explainability, in a lot of cases, a logistic regression model is a great fit. So with that, let me throw that over to Scott. I'll restate the question. Is there a way to produce a simple predictive modeling prototype just by using Excel, and how much data would be needed? Scott?
That is a great question, and the simple answer is yes, you can. Not only within Excel, Excel has some add-ins that will do this type of analysis, primarily quantitative multiple regression analysis and qualitative logistic regression. Some of the things, if you're sticking to prototype, that's a great way to get started. I still use Excel, even though I use other big packages, because it helps me with data preparation. I use it a whole lot. I trick it to write code for me when I need it to. So even if you're going beyond prototype, Excel is still a valuable tool. There is another package that's called Excel Miner that's commercially available that you can purchase, and it will talk to Excel. But really what you need to think about is, once you're through with the prototyping, what are you going to do with it? Is this going to be a model that you're going to need to roll out? If you do, then maybe you need a different environmental consideration. But yes, it's perfect for getting started, and you can do a lot of stuff with it. In terms of the quantity of records that you need, as Eric pointed out, it certainly is situational. It depends upon the type of modeling that you're doing. For example, if you're doing something that's generally associated both with data mining and predictive analytics, something that's called clustering, then you're generally working with the census or all the data that you've got. If you're trying to segment your records somehow, then that's everything that you've got. But for most predictive analytics situations and most data mining applications, rule of thumb is generally 1 to 3,000 records for training, testing, and validation. If you use a certain type of validation technique that's called cross-fold validation, then you can get by with a smaller sample set. But I generally like to have a minimum of 1,000 records.
That's great advice, Scott. And I've got to apologize to you. Your audio connection is outstanding. I had to mute you earlier because I was getting a lot of echo as I was speaking, but for some reason it's gone now. So I certainly invite you to interject and interrupt me. I did have to mute you earlier, but the echo's gone, so I'm going to keep you live. So last question, a great one. It almost sounds like a seed question, but it's not. Is why is establishing an internal predictive modeling practice important? Eva asks. Of course, we love that question because we're the ones who are emphatic about extending your analytic maturity by formalizing a practice for predictive analytics. And Stefano says thank you for the webinar and your answers, Scott, in the Q&A. You're very welcome, Stefano, and thanks for attending. So Eva, thanks for that question. We love when we have it because we love answering this one. And I'd say probably the best analogy is it'd be the same reason as why would you build a factory, because it takes longer to get that first car built. To build a factory first, it's far more expensive for that first car to roll off the production line. But once you do build a factory, then those cars can roll off the line with phenomenal efficiency. Now that's one aspect, is efficiency, and you can still paint them different colors. You can still customize them to a large degree with the factory. But other aspects for building the practice is to ensure that you put your team together in a way that's going to be very effective. So you may be very surprised to understand that most of the people that you require on an analytic team, the team that Tony had expressed in the portion of his presentation, most of them are available within your organization. And because of the capability of modern software, you may not need to try to go out and find one of the most experienced or seasoned data scientists. If you can have an external consultant assess and roadmap your project definition, that roadmap is typically not very technical. Those who have done some basic analytics and statistics can follow the roadmap and do the transformations that are mapped out. Use modern software that handles the complexity of the mathematics, and run the resulting factory or practice. And then when everybody in the team is positioned properly into those major roles, then the whole practice not only works, like I say, more efficiently, but also more effectively, because now we know how to use each person in their own roles, from the leadership and meeting their goals and making sure that we're conveying the results in the terms that they'll adopt and understand, as well as when and how to work with the subject matter experts, how to look down the road with IT to ensure that we're going to diffuse bombs well in advance and work well in the environment and not have to retrofit, to how the users will utilize the system. We don't want to just come up with the interface or the illustrations that we think would be fitting for us, but what's important for them so that they'll best adopt it. And of course, functional managers and the analytics, I would say, as far as the team role goes, is among the lesser important, as long as you have some kind of external guidance to help you establish the process and know how to define the problem, know how to prepare the data. So when all those come together, then you not only end up with a better model, you not only end up with a better process, you end up with a whole better functioning practice to be able to maintain and monitor those resulting processes, and to have an ongoing functional analytic practice that gets beyond just doing analytics for the sake of analytics and coming up with a very sound results that will be put into practice, put into operations, and make your organization shift from gut level decisioning to data driven. And that's among the benefits of working with an external consultant as well. They often know how to help organizations make that transition and the shift of mindset that often isn't very difficult. or often is very difficult, rather, to shift the mindset and start to shift the decisioning. And work is part psychologist, part analyst, part project lead, and that's not the type of person you necessarily need on board full time. So hopefully that helps give some guidance and some consideration as to how to stand up a practice within your organization for analytics. So I've really hogged that question, Scott. You know I like that one a lot, and love to respond to it. So let me invite you, before we wrap up the event, if there's anything you'd like to expand upon, either for this question or just analytics in general.
Okay. Well, I believe the question had a why in it. Was I wrong on that? All right.
Let me go back and look at it. You're right. Why establishing an internal predictive modeling practice is important. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty easy answer, to tell you the truth. The why is time and money. And resources. Time is associated with resources, and money is associated with resources, and both of those are money, to tell you the truth. I believe Buckminster Fuller said money is information in motion. Well, if you're expending resources, both human capital and also financial capital, then predictive analytics is all about efficiencies. It helps you understand, if we're talking from a business perspective, it helps you to understand your customers better and to meet their needs. The classical definition of marketing, it helps you to avoid risk if you're in the finance department, and all of these things translate into to saving money. One of the classic applications of predictive analytics has to do with communications, whether it be direct mail or whether it be email. You can use predictive analytics to deliver the right messages to the right consumers within your database or prospects, acquire the correct types of prospects, and you can do it more efficiently. Quite often when we build customer models, for example, we will illustrate to the client that gee whiz, here's 100% of who you have been mailing. Did you know that if you actually only mail 60% of these people, that you'll make a whole lot more money? And that usually knocks people over backwards in their chairs, and they have to literally pause and take time to think about it. But it's true. The why, it has to do with efficiencies and savings and incremental profits in terms of time and money.
Great point, and I got to say, Scott, because you're involved a good bit in business development yourself for predictive analytics and data mining, and the true potential of predictive analytics, even through case summaries, is so concentrated that we almost have to tone them down a little bit simply to be believable, and it's not an easy sell. Leadership is often resistant because the gains are so great. Again, they're not really buying into it, and then the other is they're timid to the sophistication of analytics. They think it's a high risk. We've been doing analytics for years. We don't really see much out of it, and it's not a tough sale, or it's not an easy sale until they continue to hear about their competitors that are successfully implementing analytics, and that's typically when they're getting off off the fence to really make something happen and start to take a more purposeful approach to analytics, a more formal approach, and that's what we encourage organizations to do. Get their head out of the software and the data. Let's back up a little bit. It's going to pay off. Let's take start with the project definition, even if we're not starting at the process or practice level. Let's back up and make sure we've got a great definition and we've really assessed the resources and defined the target and looked at the baselines and how are we going to interpret the results on the other end. Do a lot more of the strategic, and again, that's the emphasis of this event, is not just to look at the data, and you gave some phenomenal considerations around data preparation and how to transform data, but the strategic part is really where the vast majority are lacking, and I think with respect to Eva's question, that's what the practice is all about, is strategic emphasis, pulling all the resources together in advance, assessing them, and looking at your team in totality. So hopefully that's gives you some great tips to know not to start the book on Chapter 5 with software and data, look at an industry standard process for data mining and predictive analytics that has as many phases that are strategic as they are tactical. The answers are out there for free. You can go out there and get them. One of them, it's a little bit outdated, but it's called the cross-industry standard process for data mining. That's the process model we used to work with until we just had to modernize it a little bit. We still work with the most of it. But at 20 minutes till the start of the new hour, we're about 10 minutes over. So we better draw this event to a close, and I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained participation, as well as in the polls, and Scott and Tony for your great segments, and Scott certainly for your great contributions in the Q&A segment. We're going to follow up shortly with an email that'll have resources and some suggestions that'll hopefully be useful to you, and from there, we'll hope you've already offered permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter. You may have elected to subscribe to that with your registration to the event. If you elected not to, we will not contact you further than a single follow-up with those resources in an email, and we'll hope that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon. So make sure to register early to secure one of the few remaining very early bird 25% discount spaces for the upcoming Toronto production, or if it's a better fit, keep Washington, D.C. in mind for September and the San Francisco Bay Area for December. And don't forget that your colleagues can join you anytime for up to 30% off. Now, if you don't have a training or travel budget but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor, you can always look into the Modeling Agency's Escort on Call program. Escort on Call is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up an Escort on Call account and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, we'll guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Escort on Call description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Scott, and Tony, thank you again for attending Data Mining Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.